Hello and welcome to another episode of the Feudal Future podcast. I'm Marshall Toplansky.
I'm Joel Kotkin.
And today we are delighted to have two very interesting guests talking about a very timely subject. Sam Abrams is a professor of politics and social sciences at Sarah Lawrence University and a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And Daniele Struppa is a world-renowned professor of mathematics and president of Chapman University. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, today we want to talk about a very complex and kind of a thorny issue, but obviously incredibly timely today, and that is the issue of cancel culture and the freedom of expression on American campuses. Joel, you want to start us off with the first question?
Yeah, I think one of the key issues, I think we all probably agree that freedom of expression is a good thing, but what's apparently happening on many campuses, and I know this from my own daughter, who happens to be at the same school as Sam is, that right now, particularly if you're a Jewish student or a supporter of Israel, you're sort of now dealing with, basically open comments that would lead to essentially the annihilation of the Israeli population, and that if you're a Jewish student, you feel threatened. So at what point, it's a very difficult issue. At what point do you say you can't say this and you can't say that? Sam, do you want to start?
Sure, happy to be here. And I will say my background of books is not nearly as impressive as the equations behind Dr. Struppa's image there, to say the least. So I'd like to step back for a minute and actually address the issue of cancel culture outside of what's going on with Israel and Hamas at the moment. Israel and Hamas, I think, is the latest example of it. But cancel culture has been a major problem on our campuses now for well over a decade. I noticed this first at Sarah Lawrence, where I teach. And one of the beauties of being at a very progressive left school is that I often see social trends before they, I'll say, infect the rest of the country. Sarah Lawrence is usually a few years ahead of this. And when we think about cancel culture, it's not just Israel Hamas. It's really a situation where we have an administrative apparatus, often called diversity, equity, inclusion. At Sarah Lawrence, it's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, Jedi, like the Star Wars films. And this is a worldview that has now been propagated on our students long before they even arrive on campus. They're given readings, they're given materials to familiarize themselves with well before they set foot. And it's a worldview that I think is inherently un-American and incredibly dangerous, because what it basically says is that the world is based on power. Who has it and who doesn't? Who are the oppressors and who is oppressed? And based on that sort of very foolish identity-based dichotomy, if you are an oppressor, you must be taken down. If you are an oppressed, you can do almost anything you like to punch up to take those down who are the oppressors. So we've seen for quite a while this flare-up where if you are white of some sort and look like you're of some dominant class, anything can be said and done against you. If you are Asian, same sort of thing. And the rules are applied differently. So while schools have rules about conduct, ethics, morals, and general behavior, what is considered dangerous, what is considered a threat, and so on, those rules are applied and viewed differently based on who says what and in what context. So if I said something against a person of color, I would be committing something that would be outrageous, that could result in my dismissal, even though I'm tenured. In the other direction, as we're seeing in Hamas, Israel, my faculty colleagues say horrible things. They have been posting and sharing things that basically call for my own death. That's fine, not a problem. So, Israel Hamas is a very powerful example of how scary the cancel culture situation is, but it's not new, and it's been around for about a decade. And one of the few silver linings of what's going on with Israel now is at least this is no longer hidden. This is no longer an issue that I have to beat the drum over. I've been writing about it for a decade. Most people won't listen. Most people don't take it seriously. I think everyone is taking it seriously now. The Jewish community in particular, who basically said, hey, you're crazy. We're all allies here. And I said, we are not. I would like to be, but I can see from your rhetoric that we are not. Jews are having one heck of a reckoning right now, and I think that's probably a good thing.
Daniele, what's your experience with this on campus with Chapman?
Well, it is a very interesting discussion. Thank you for having me on this. Let me say that I agree, generally speaking, with what Sam was saying. There is one premise that I sort of disagree, or is that I concur with the fact that the lens to look at society is power. Everything is about power exchange. So I don't have a problem with that, analyzing the world by the instruments of power. What I think is silly about the super left movement is the overlay of power onto race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, so that if you are of a certain color, then you're an oppressed. If you are of another, so this idea that white are oppressors, you bring it to the Appalachian Mountains, where it shows how stupid the idea is. You don't need to even argue about it. So this idea that we identify the certain groups and then we analyze everything of the groups, that's where the real mistake is. So in terms of the cancel culture, I think that is definitely true what Sam was saying, that offensive language is looked at differently depending on who are you offending. Every year I used to meet with our honor students and we talked about free speech. And we talk about the burning of the flag, and everybody agrees that you should be burning the American flag because, you know, it's my right, it's my freedom, and I agree with that, no problem. But then when I said, what if I go out and I burn the Mexican flag because I think there are too many immigrants? Then all of a sudden, that is not acceptable. I can burn the Israeli flag because, you know, we know the Jews have been oppressing the world. I don't know how exactly, but for centuries apparently. So that is okay to burn. But if you burn the flag of Palestinians, then all of a sudden. So there is this. Now, I don't think we saw any instance in which this has become the law, but the greatest form of cancel culture is a self-censorship that people impose on themselves. So if you go in the Atala Piazza here in the center of Chapman, and you say that, you know, the Palestinians really need to be taken down, nobody's going to do anything to you. We are not going to punish you, just like we don't punish the people who say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. But the opprobrium, the social disgust that you will have to endure is enough for people not wanting to say that. So I think that is very subtle. Well, now it's not so subtle anymore, but it's a very insidious form of censorship. It's a censorship. You know what? I told this to my friends many times. In the past, we had to worry about the kings, the emperors telling us what we can and cannot do. Now we don't need that. We don't need the police to tell us what we can or cannot do. We have the mob that is telling us. We have become our own imperial power, and that is very scary, and especially for young people. And I know that we have young people here that really don't feel comfortable saying what they'd like to do. I had 3 children that went to school here. My son is very conservative, so we'll take him out of the equation. But my 2 girls, they are really like the ignorant, typical young kids. Okay, so they're nice girls and they're wonderful people, but they don't have but they both told me about the constant indoctrination in so many of their classes. And they figured it out, and they've learned that you don't really speak out. You know, you do what you think the professor will want to see, and that's not right.
Well, I just want to follow up a little bit on maybe what is our responsibility as people at a university. Now, I'm not an academic in the way that you guys are, and so maybe it's even more of an issue for you. But it seems to me that the way people are being taught, they're being taught a completely one-sided view. For instance, my daughter gets stuff from her sociology teacher, which is completely biased, and and that you have a teacher who's marching in anti-Israel rallies. Well, what is it? What is a little Jewish girl supposed to think about this? And I found with my students, not just the indoctrination, which, by the way, my minority students also didn't like, but the fact that they're not being told any history, like when what's the history of Palestine? What who controlled it? They don't like the majority of young people think that Gaza is under the control of Israel, which is kind of ridiculous. Is there something we can do to check the kind of indoctrination that starts in high school but really hits a crescendo in college?
So
Maybe Sam, and then I'll add some comments.
you feel free to go first.
Well, my short answer is no. I don't think there is much we can do. There is something that we hold sacrosanct, which is academic freedom. So if a math teacher has a tirade about Gaza, that's not protected. But if a sociology teacher uses this incident to discuss the notion of occupation and colonialism and social resistance, they should do that. And there is no way that you can limit the bias that they bring in, because we are all human and they will bring their own bias. The real problem is that through what Gramsci and later on Rudi Dutschke and Marcuse called the long march through the institutions are now almost monolithic in their bias. I honestly, I'll be very honest, I don't mind people having bias. I'm biased, okay? You're my friends and you know I'm very pro-Israeli, so that's my bias, and I don't pretend to be right at all. I mean, so if I have a conversation, that bias comes out. So the bias is not the problem. The problem is when the bias is almost uniform in a group. And then it's really difficult for people to hear different views. And but that is something that has been done with great ability, I think, by the left throughout in Europe, certainly, but also in the United States. And the idea is that now, every statistic will tell you in sociology department, the balance is what, 9 to 10, 9 to 1, 8 to 2. In fact, I'm kind of curious to know how Sam is surviving. I mean, I have that as a
Really?
side conversation, but so I don't think there is much that can be done.
So I'm surviving because of two things: tenure, because my last few articles, rather, I called the president of Sarah Lawrence a disgrace. I believe she is. I stand by that, and I have the academic freedom to say that. She can't do anything about it, and it drives her crazy. But the fact is, her silence, which, and let me just contextualize this for all the viewers and listeners. When we had a storm about a year ago, a hurricane that prevented a number of students from coming to school on time from Florida, there was a page-long email expressing deep sympathy, deep understanding, and offering therapy and counseling services over a storm. Now, that's real. I do not want to diminish the fact that hurricanes.
Climate oppressed.
Well, we've seen it. It's pretty scary, actually, when it hits, right? But, it took her 5 days to respond. She didn't need to even take sides. All she had to do was say, we know something has happened. It's a little confusing. People are suffering. We're here for you. She did not actually have to take a political position. She could have simply offered support. She chose not to do that, at which point I said, we obviously know your silence is sharing where your views are on that. The second reason I'm okay, and I'm very open about this, is that by being in the New York area, there is an awful lot of diversity of opinion, diversity of people, and I'm not in a small college town. I can exist outside a small school bubble. This would be very different in a place like Middlebury or Western Connecticut or something like that. As for dealing with the bias, I have no problem with bias as well. I think bias is inevitable. There's not much we can do to get rid of it. But what we can do is, instead of indoctrinating our students into a progressive, identity-laden set of biases when they set foot on campus as first years, we can teach them how to be thinkers. I mean, as a math person, that's exactly what, the hard sciences do. What we could do in social science is say, hey, what are the different tools? What are the different approaches? How do we answer questions from a scientific method, which is what I like to try to do. And we could teach our students to be increasingly skeptical. We could teach our students to ask, are there other views? Why are you saying this view only? Are there alternative views? The fact is, as I say, when we talk about abortion, for instance, in my own courses, if there aren't 3 or 4 legitimate viewpoints on how to think about this, then we have a problem. And the fact is, there are numerous legitimate viewpoints. Our students need to be empowered and supported by administrators, which we can do, to say, hey, are you presenting this adequately, fairly? Are you giving enough room for students to talk? I certainly respect academic freedom. I need it. I lean on it. But I take my responsibility very seriously when I teach to make sure that I have conservative and liberal voices present in the room in the readings. And I let the students know. In fact, the first thing any student who presents a reading in one of my classes is required to do is, what's the bio of the reader? What is the the writer? What is the bias of the writer and why? And what are the facts? What are the arguments? What are the theories? And let's talk about it. And that can prevent it, but this is not going on. We could force more workshops. We could work with our students outside of the individual department biases to try to fight this. And one of the things I'm very confident about our current students is that when we look at Gen Zers today, they deal with this online all the time. There's a huge amount of flow in. How do you figure out what's true, what isn't? How do we figure out whom to listen to and who to ignore? We need to cultivate those skills. We need to cultivate those skills starting in middle school. I'm looking at schools for my kids right now here in the city, and one of the things they keep talking about is online literacy. That is, how do we not end up in dark, creepy corners of the web? This is something that we need to be doing much earlier. How do we evaluate evidence? How do we figure these things out?
My question for you about this, though, is, we live in on campus, we're kind of in a bubble. We don't recognize the broader competitive environment for information that our students are dealing with, right? We're in a world where confirmation bias is the business model of social media, right? That's creating the polarization is what makes the money. Mm-hmm. And so we only account for a relatively small percentage of the neuronal activity that is going on inside of our students' brains. Increasingly, the social media people and the spillover to traditional media are taking a larger and larger portion of that. How do we effectively compete against that to be able to create the critical thinking you're talking about?
Daniele?
Yeah, first I want to make a quick comment on what Sam was saying. And by the way, I agree wholeheartedly. What I'd like to add is why I think this is happening. So if you ask me, I'm a math teacher, and you say, Daniele, what is your job as a professor of math in the university? I would tell you it is to develop the mathematical ability of my students, is to provide them whatever mathematical knowledge is the course that I'm teaching, whether it's algebraic geometry or topology or complex analysis, but most important, the ability to learn new math and to use those instruments to answer mathematical questions. If you ask the same question of many faculty in the non-STEM disciplines, you will find a slightly different perspective. Their perspective is that they believe, and they believe it honestly, so I'm not really accusing them of anything, but they believe that their job is to help students change the world. That's one of the things that we hear all the time when people graduate, go out and change the world. So you're moving from a scholarly perspective, which is what, when you graduate in mathematics, I never thought I was going to change the world. My job was to be the very best mathematician I could be and solve the very hardest problem that I could find. But if you are in the other discipline, you will hear a lot about this change in the world. So you go from a scholarly perspective to an advocacy perspective. And so when the teacher indoctrinates, I believe, and I hope I'm not too naive, they are in good faith because this is the job. The job is to create the future of the society. And this society, in their view, is fundamentally corrupt, is fundamentally decomposing, and their job is to create the new society. That's why we have this, what is happening in the classroom. It's a different perspective. Now, to your question, I'm sorry for having taken your time to elaborate my thinking on that, but the question, how do we compete with the social media? It's another very, very hard thing to do. I teach and I see students all the time. When they get bored, these things appears and you have to say, Joe, do you mind? Oh, sorry, professor. Yesterday night I was cooking for my students. I was cooking before coming to your event. I was cooking a beautiful dish from Sicily. The students are there with me in the kitchen, and I'm trying to explain the Arab origin of this food and all this stuff. And you see people getting on their little phone. So it's not only when I teach math that I understand may not be the most exciting of topics. So it is a hard competition. I think what happened is that the use of this thing has decreased the attention span of people. I find myself looking at my phone when I watch a movie now. When the movie gets slow, I find myself picking this up because I need to be stimulated. So this, I think, is like a drug that is entering in the brain of our students and frankly, of all of us. And I don't know how you can make education win that battle. You know, there are a few kids who are incredibly dedicated, incredibly passionate, and they will actually seek the real dialogue. But many of them are fundamentally tied to their success in having as many likes as they can, in having their friends liking what they do. And so I'm not very hopeful with that. Like in the previous answer, I'm holding virtually no hopes of what you guys would like to see.
So I would love to respond and say I agree with everything. You know, one of the big shifts in higher ed, and I watched it happen as I was completing my own PhD, is that when I was doing political science government, I was told I have to be dispassionate by definition. I cannot be politically engaged because I'm studying this sort of stuff. 2 to 3 years after I finished in the 2008, 2009, 2010, that era rather, it shifted from ivory tower scholarship for the sake of being scholarly and answering questions to of why and how to scholar activism. I mean, more often than not, you see people say activist, writer, scholar, teacher, something like that. It's activism. You're completely right. Schools and administrators can say, you're welcome to do that on your own time. You're welcome to do that vis-a-vis extracurricular, extramural work, but we're here to teach you how to think, not necessarily what to think. And that seems trite, but it really matters today. As for these things, the fact of the matter is that I certainly was addicted to this like everybody else. It's designed to do that. And I turn mine off before I teach. And I ask every student to turn theirs off.
I do the same.
I have no laptop policy, and no iPad policy, and no tech policy. And it is absolutely thrilling because for 1 hour and 50 minutes for each seminar, I am fully engaged, fully present. I will tell you that the 1 hour and 50 minutes goes by like that. It is so much fun. I found my voice again. I figured out how to be a teacher again. No more droning on or looking at unending digital media. We're present, we're here, we're working on something. And it is a lot of fun. And the students have to do that. And that's a prereq to walking into the room. I can tell you that, again, as someone looking for schools for my kids here in the city, we're seeing more and more schools require that phones be put in lock boxes and they're not allowed to be used. They are taken out 1 or 2 times during the day for emergencies. Parents or whatever know if there's an emergency, you can always call the front office. They'll get the kids. But, we see stats that I've seen one statistic come out from Pew that says that an average teenage girls are higher than boys in this case, checks their phone 490 times a day. Let's try to make that a lot less, right? So I agree.
It strikes me, Sam, that this is like a loco parentis problem, not a teaching
Yes.
problem.
It's both.
They're not getting any training or discipline from their parents at all.
No. And why? Because the parents are stuck on their phones too and don't want to do the parenting. This is a problem, but these are very big problems, very challenging problems. I don't think they're completely insurmountable. I have loved teaching again in the last couple of years because I've had the phone away, and I love being present again. I forget sometimes how amazing, I used to observe very seriously the Jewish Sabbath, how amazing it is to have 12 or 24 hours, whatever you choose to observe, of complete disconnect from technology, and you're only present in the immediate world around you, your friends, your family, that immediate community. It's incredibly powerful, and we're forgetting those traditions. So I think colleges can model that. I think colleges actually can say, we really need you to go device free in certain courses. Absolutely.
Well, let me flip to the other side of this, because part of it is making sure you have the attention.
Yes.
Right, which is what you're talking about. And by the way, I love the idea. I'm about to try that in my next class. So
I've been doing
whatever problems come out. But once you've got the attention, one of the things that I've found difficult is to get students to really think critically and challenge the obvious. Challenge or not the obvious, but the thing that's right in front of their face. What techniques do you find that get them to do that? do you find the same reticence?
And it is it something that, for instance, at Chapman that we can somehow promote, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, it really requires an intense dedication of the teachers. It requires, and I know we have teachers who care about this, and I know Chapman is a place that has teachers that care about this. And I even know the UCs and Berkeley and Riverside have teachers that care about this. But a big part of it, I find at least, is I expose myself, not obviously inappropriately, but emotionally expose myself. And I make them aware of who I am and what I care about and who I'm about. And I usually say, I'm going to have to throw the first 2, if not 3 sessions away. And when I do that, I find that I try to connect with the students. In the second or third session, I'll often go do an activity, or we'll do something in New York City to connect and have that social bond. Once that's created, and we realize we're all people here, we're in this together, a lot of those walls fall very, very quickly. And when the walls fall, you can begin to ask those questions, and the dialogue and discourse can really open up, and you can have these conversations. But it's slow. It's a lot of work. It requires some money sometimes. The schools may have to say, look, I want to take my kids out, the students out for pizza. Food, as we all know, is the lubricant of sociability, and sometimes I may need a couple $100 to do it. But I've noticed that it works very, very well. But it's a very heavy lift. But I would say, since doing this, identity politics in the classrooms have disappeared. We no longer get as a this person of this person. We all know what these people are. Talk to me about what you think. Talk to me about the ideas, and then how your experience is, given those categories, which are often immutable, play out. But it's a heavy lift and requires the trust. But I can tell you that we've talked about incredibly contentious things over the last 4 or 5 years. No one's reported. No one goes out of class crying. I haven't had a bias response team approach anybody about anything in years. And almost every student says, I've learned something, and that's our job. But I could use a break. I'm not going to lie about that.
But let me ask Daniele,
I don't want to talk too much.
You have you're president of the university. Is there any way we could promote the kind of things that Sam's talking about? I mean, when I teach, I go out of my way. I'll have them read Frantz Fanon, and then I'll have them read somebody on the conservative side. Is there any standard or any policy that an administration can do to encourage the kind of things that Sam's doing?
Well, I think that the idea of 2 things. What I think Sam is very right is the idea of creating this personal opening, so that students see you as a human being, and that facilitates the set of conversations. So I completely concur with the exposing yourself, as you said, in an appropriate way. I like the idea of, obviously I cook for them. That's an example of.
I thought that was wonderful, by the way. I love that. I wish I had, if I didn't have 3 kids, I would do something like that. It's a little hard.
And
yeah, but he's Italian. They cook better anyway.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In terms of stimulating the ability of teachers and the desire of teachers to give alternative reading, so to speak, I think that most of the people you would talk to, they would tell you that they do that. And I think they may think they do that. I honestly don't think that there is a ill will of, at all cost, indoctrinate students. They give them readings, and maybe they give them also alternative readings, but then in the discussion, I think the perspective comes out. It's very hard for faculty to hide their perspective when you teach social issues. And that's what I think the difficulty is. So we encourage our faculty to think diversity, not in terms only of the skin of the color, but diversity of opinion. It's actually in our description of what diversity is, the diversity of opinion is there, the diversity of political points of view is there. I think we call it viewpoint diversity. And everybody on paper agrees to that. The challenge is that when you do it, your bias comes out, and I think that that's what is almost impossible to avoid, because that's what is human nature.
Well, and also, to be fair about it, if you look at how K-12 education is managed, it seems to be a lot more hands-on when it comes to the pedagogy. That things are mandated that you will teach this way. And that's something that we would like to avoid in higher education, although my sense is that many professor colleagues of mine could use a innovation injection when it comes to experimenting with new ways of communicating with students, and in fact may not really know of new techniques that could really create greater engagement. I don't know, what's your sense about that? How directive and intentional can you be at the higher education level?
There is one thing, I mean, that you touched upon briefly, and you remember I made some comment yesterday night. The origin of all our problems, in my opinion, is still the K12 system. Because one of the reasons why it's so hard for students to look critically at things is because they know nothing. They come to college and they know absolutely nothing. I gave you yesterday night over dinner, I gave you a couple of examples, but it's just frightening. You know, 2 semesters ago, or 2 years ago, I taught a class about the birth of the Communist Party in Italy. And it was an opportunity to explore what it meant to try to create social change in a society like the Italian society. Students didn't know anything about World War I. Students didn't know anything about the Soviet Revolution. Students had never, you know, they all are Marxists, but none of them has read a single word of Karl Marx. They didn't know who Stalin was. They didn't know who Lenin was. So this makes them really liable to being easily twisted. When I was in high school, I remember we spent 3 long years of doing philosophy in a very heavy way. We read significant amount of Plato's dialogue. We read a significant amount of Aristotle. That's in the first year. We read St. Augustine. We read significant pieces from the Scholastic. I remember reading the Prolegomena of Kant and so on and so forth. So when a teacher comes up with stuff, I had some instrument. Now our kids don't have those. So I think that it's vain to try to solve the problem at the college level when we really should put all of our energy in building significant K12 system in which things are actually taught. And instead, I think you're right. They pay a lot of attention to pedagogy, but they don't pay any attention to content. I have yet to see one math teacher of my kids know anything about math. And that really drives me insane because they come home and it's clear that their teacher don't know anything. I have a good friend here that is fighting with all of his school all the time because he's also a mathematician and his kids are not learning anything in their high school. And so the same is, I'm sure, is true for history. The same is true for literature. So we have all these teachers that are very adept in how to deal with a diverse classroom, in how to make sure the students feel comfortable, in how to make sure they can spot a social problem in their lives, but they don't teach anything. The school is where you need to teach stuff. And I think it's become instead a replacement for the family. So there, I think, is where the real problem is. So when we come to college, we are unprepared. I'm genuinely unprepared to deal, even though I'm 68 now, to deal with students who don't know absolutely anything, because it's very hard to find any hook. You know, I try all kinds of connections and they all fall on flat ears. And forget about when I teach math. I mean, when I teach math, it's just appalling what I have to deal with. And but the same is true. You know, I was mentioning yesterday some example. Our kids don't know anything. They haven't read anything. They don't know anything, not only about philosophy, but they know virtually nothing about literature. They barely know any history, which of course is part of the problem. The topic we started with today, right? The Palestinian issue. Well, that's not a 5 years old issue. You know, now everybody goes back to the war of 1967. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. This is a much older, much longer issue than the war of 67. So, but these kids don't know anything. You know, they don't know where Italy is. They don't know where Israel is. It's just, I mean, I feel really saddened because we are trying to work with kids who have been damaged by schools that have wasted their intelligence. You know, when, in the K12 period, their brain is expanding at the speed of light. They have an incredible ability to learn, to absorb, to condensate, to connect. Those are the connections that you need to train your, but we waste our time. I've seen the most horrible, having children going to school is a terrible experience in this country because I don't know, Sam, if you have kids, but God,
yes, great.
Because the thing I can, you know, my daughter once came home and her job was to build a cube and to put facts about the periodic table of the elements. The periodic table of the elements is one of the greatest intellectual achievements, okay? This guy Mendeleev came up with a really clever idea, not completely well-formed. That's what you need to learn about the periodic table. Instead, you do a little cube with different facts on every face. I was appalled by that. I was saddened by that. My daughter was an intelligent girl. Don't waste her time in making do a stupid presentation with the cube.
And here,
I think you're mute, Marshall. Maybe
It's regurgitative education.
Yeah,
That's the thing that I find the students are dealing with, right? It's just they've been taught to just vomit back up facts.
And presentation. My student, that's one of the things I don't know if some and you guys find the same. They're very good in making presentations. They have learned the ability of having these really clever PowerPoints with nothing significant. So
I don't let them do.
PowerPoint is great.
I do not let them do PowerPoints anymore for that.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So, a couple of things. I agree completely with what you said. You and I should write something about it because
let's do that, Sam.
But more than that, a couple of comments. Number one, college professors need to be incentivized, I believe, to do more of this work. Remember that outside of certain liberal arts colleges, publish versus perish is what you have to do. We're overworked and underpaid. Most colleagues want to get out. How do you do that? Spending time on teaching isn't it. Doing your bizarre research for 5 people to read and say is great is going to get you ahead. So that's the homo rationalicus there that we have to deal with. On the K12, I agree with everything you said. And 2 reactions to it are as follows. When people ask, what do I teach? Of late, my answer is history. I have had to spend, whenever I have a year-long course, I spend at least the first semester now doing history because no one has any context to situate the present in the past. I regularly will assign something from someone like Marcus Aurelius or Cicero or Pliny. Go figure. I never thought I would do this. I love that I do. I went to a Jewish day school and history was everything there. You had to understand all of that. So this was just what I did. But Professor Struppa or President Struppa was right. No one else has this. So I now say I teach politics and history, or more often history and politics, where we're literally reading history so people have some common sense, core understanding of, okay, this is where we're going to situate the present. That being said, another big issue with K12 is if we look at the history on that, one thing that I always like to point out is that schools, K12 were the anchors of their community. It wasn't just teaching history and Latin, great works of literature, which is what you need to do to understand the human condition, which we have seemingly forgotten how to teach people. But they also socialized our communities and our students into being good citizens. So you would have to deal with questions of civility, questions of disagreement, questions of working with diversity. So we've failed on all those dimensions as well. So we get to college, they're stuck on these things. They haven't learned these critical lessons, K12, of how to really deal with diversity. And it blows up when they suddenly have this freedom. And instead of being taught history or classics, it's activist professors, and boom, Joel's, daughter is, being harassed on campus. And sadly, I understand that, and I wish I didn't.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up for the day. This has been such a fascinating conversation that I think merits continuing. So I'd love to invite both of you back for a continuation of this conversation, especially as we see the play out in the current situation. So thank you very much for joining us here on the Feudal Future podcast.
And maybe out of all this, we can start at some sort of counter movement to what's been going on. I mean, it's going to be hard to change these institutions, but when you see your children, whether it's in the high school level or junior high level or at the college, not getting the kind of education that I got, that I'm sure Marshall got, I'm sure both of you got, when you went to school, to come out as a stronger, more skeptical, more cultured human being. Somehow, if it seems to me, if the universities can't accomplish that, then what the hell do we need them for? Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I want to thank you for doing this. Thank you for having us.
Thank you particularly for introducing me to Sam. That's
It's a pleasure on my end.
that is
And I have
what
real
I'm
books.
gaining out of this meeting. So it's always great when you meet the intelligent people that you can share ideas with. You guys are doing a terrific job. So thank you for doing this stuff.
Well, and thank you for those of you listening for listening to the Feudal Future podcast.
The Feudal Future.